chef des communautés de la baie James, maire des municipalités et président de localité. Chers amis, Washaw. Je suis présentement à Davos, en Suisse, où je participe au Forum économique mondial. C'est ce qui explique que je ne peux être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Il était toutefois hors de question que je manque l'occasion de souligner cet événement historique. Je le fais donc avec l'aide de la technologie. Je tenais absolument à vous exprimer le profond sentiment de fierté que j'éprouve à vous savoir réunis pour cette première rencontre officielle du gouvernement régional des livres de notre histoire commune. Notre volonté partagée de bâtir un Québec plus prospère nous a menés à l'innovation. Ensemble, nous avons créé un tout nouveau modèle de gouvernance pour le territoire de la baie James. Un modèle unique en son genre, un modèle qui est conforme à nos besoins communs et qui respecte les réalités qui nous sont propres. Pour la première fois au Québec, et peut-être même en Amérique,
There you go. Check. Check 1 2.
Good morning. My name is Simeon Trapper. We're going to start in a few minutes. There's a small delay on the USB key. It's not my fault. So it's technology fault this morning, so we can blame it on that. There's no Indian time. We're on time, but so I'll be the host for today, and because Jason Aldo is at school today. He's doing his first day in school at Val-d'Or UCAT, so he's going to be here tomorrow. So another couple of minutes. Be patient. Don't leave. We got a lot of stuff going on today, so in 2 days. We're just waiting for the chief Pauline, okay? Be back in 2 minutes maybe? 2 minutes Indian time. You good? Good morning. Went fast, Indian time this time. Really fast. Okay. So we're going to start with the agenda today of the day. Today is Tuesday, August 19th. And we're going to ask someone to come pray. Billy Caramellic Sr., will you please come in the front and pray?
Welcome everybody. Roger, ready to bad. We'll go downstairs, let's all stand. James Chigay, Mom's the boys item says they're gone. Let's all bow our heads. Nos dawin an shmut gadang to gatsin, scusi gayang. Sidias nanos gadi chabad, did you mod shidiat? Sidi amud mato de one as it state actor der Eeyou Istchee. If you get more than so indeed with a dog, Yendi Jayamado. Jamie Do. Scusi new, Chimando. Here, sat seal new. Seems said you want you stand at the seat. Jay not. Get the average start at Matt's head with his seat. Seems said to me, man, stay moon. Me vested man, he pushed me out with the actor. He pushed me down so indeed. Did you happen? I could get Matt's seen at the seat. Father in heaven, we are so thankful that we could come together to be able to discuss the issues, the matters that are on the table. Give us wisdom, Lord, and give us knowledge of understanding. We do pray for all the people of the Cree nation, Lord, that you be with them wherever they are today. We thank you so much that we had people in the past who had wisdom and knowledge that we could accomplish a lot of things in USG. We thank you for the past leadership. We thank you for the present leadership too, Lord, that you give them a great wisdom and guidance and direction from above. We're so thankful that we belong into this great nation that you have given us, that we are masters of this land and the sea and all the animals that you have given us. Thank you for this big garden that you have given us in USG, Lord, that the animals and the water and all the things we enjoyed in the bush. We thank you for allowing us that we could come together like this to each community. Lord, that you be with us and be able to talk about the past, present, Lord. We thank you for everything what you have done. We thank you for those who've been traveling to, Lord, that you give them a safe journey. We ask you that you be with us throughout this day and also throughout the evening, Lord. Be with us, and we ask you this all in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Look at that.
We go to Billy. Thank you, Billy. As we continue, on the agenda, the next agenda, we'll be having a review, a welcoming remarks from the chief and council. And I think this is Pauline and is a band council. But she ran away. She was just there. Okay, I'll take the mic I'll sing a song. I know, I don't do that. I'm nervous. Okay, the councilors can come up and wait for Pauline. Councilors and the deputy chief. May you come in front, please? You coming upstairs?
You sit on a chair.
Yeah, sit down in the chair.
Talk to Pauline first.
Okay.
Community.
Yeah, that was you guys? You and the chief and council?
Project. Good morning. Nutrition, Eeyou Istchee. Kaya bosto dit sebitai. Naskum no, jishka naskum no. Eeyou Istchee. Once it's streak, I do the dance on her. Just like it. There's a funeral going on in Picoland today. Our neighbors had lost somebody. She went her way, a young woman, and that's why some members cannot make it today. I udakshit min jibete guy I building koskaun hadayo ugawi jicheman chishkas jimuchema asko stigat unhanu when ejichuedga. And that's Sito Gawanskan, Jechep. And I'll take a moment of silence just to remember the people when Haikaj.
Yeah, their brief history, they put a price tag on all of Quebec, $7 billion. Quebec the base is as a diachi to hold the scoring on no way to go. Naga the match grand now 7 make I know Jim sorry when you meet I know Jacob Quebec is. I could go to Pecan Bihui and Indians of Quebec and started their own Grand Council. In 71-74, the James Bay Energy Corporation builds the James Bay Highway, a major 620-kilometer paved highway from Matagami to the site of the major and biggest dam of hydroelectric development project, LG2. This major highway opens up Eeyou Istchee. And now just by I was good and I LG2 as in Kadaganot. Or down and she's in Kadawa, Ayon Yimnanot. Was die 685 Nando, yes, Ispatao, Sispa and Scudam. 685 feet. And in April 5, 72, EU leaders to the Indian Civil Association initiated legal action to stop Quebec James Bay Power Project. The Inuit of Nunavut, through the Northern Quebec Inuit Association, joined the legal proceedings. The court has become Quebec's longest case at that time. In Washaw, what she did history, the vote to chief and counsel in Quebec, Canada, and how get it. They didn't recognize chief and counsel in any community, so we had to go through an organized, recognized association, which was Indians Quebec at that time. They took the court on our behalf to the my guy introduced so watched Ashigabwichi Dakiva and Jiwanda South Gauchich and Jivichimouts. Which started Satan and Jay. Andrew DeLille, I still remember Andrew DeLille standing in front of the judge shaking. Did you one night the Casco then Jay? But we managed to pull through. Eeyou hunters and Eeyou Istchee were instrumental and essential in the court proceedings to explain Eeyou and Doho and the use, occupation, and governance of Eeyou Istchee. How would you know who you is garbage hagano that you hit it as a match for the Eeyou? Still not you eat stouts and is but you booked my second is what that. How go I, Judge Maloof? How in Gapsich had the Eeyou? Then the answer, I shall stay wait in your project. Kauai, while Quebec and Hydro-Quebec appealed the judgment of Maloof, on November 29, 1973, Premier Barrasso proposed a settlement to the Eeyou, and the Inuit and designated John Siacha as Quebec's special representative and negotiator. Eeyou Istchee reject the offer, but leave the door open for negotiations. 11 points you think, yeah, the right sit Shackums and Higan and Robert Barrasso. Yeah, no, but we'll use the contents to negotiate a deal, Kun John Sias and the guy, he was the assistant deputy minister to John Gretchen, Magajini, and the ghost of Naganot to negotiate the deal for Quebec. You talk about the Eeyou Istchee, their rights and aspirations. Eeyou Istchee decided to pursue recognition and protection of Eeyou rights through negotiations. How will Mr. Snitch in Stoinano and G? Vishin give a gym as the weather journey. I think at Nano Stoinano was said Shayu, said the Jagun Janji. It's now Chavin, the Mugaga and start him Tedna. Magajin never been made a start him Tedna known as to notes all over. Saw every communication act. And no Chagadaga that one, I don't know, maybe they think they know better. In East Maine, Eeyou Istchee, August 74, Eeyou Istchee decided to establish the Grand Council of the Cree of Quebec. Chief Billy Diamond became the first Grand Chief. In 74, I was going to go Grand Council, the General by the Jikaso, the Mikaso. The Magai, Chief Billy Diamond, I was going to go to Grand Chief. Founding members of the Grand Council of the Cree of Quebec are the Eeyou Chiefs: Chief Robert Ganadabad, Fort George, Chief Fred Blacknet, Penn Hills, Chief Matthew Shanos, East Maine, Chief Billy Diamond, Roberts House, Chief Smalley Padawabno, Sydney, Chief Peter Gull, Wasanbi, and Chief Perthy Wabachi, Nemska. Nukun Nishan says, Matsiat. How can I, Fred Blacknet? Under the Grand Council of the Cree of Quebec, the negotiations for modern-day treaty continue. I got costed Chicago and it's cost Staganods and Grand Council, costed Chicago and never make a guy named Staganods in Scamon. What was the vision of the treaty makers and leaders of Eeyou Istchee in the early 70s? The Vajagon was Stagon, Red Dogot Nation, the Vajagon was Stagon, there is Snaju it must. Mukunio, I should battle just to get chair, they say, what near I should much hot not there here, I should say to Joy. Came I can go and go again, say to moon and at you day to match at you may be here good one. I shouldn't school on stagnant. The Vamp side, Jim Magnum, one, you are near Magun. Mugmag Jag, what's to be the decent school to none notes. This vision largely aimed to change and improve the social political situation of Eeyou Istchee. Agmo Kaisa could stagnate so that you may be having no deal. It told that you may be that match hot guy. Gataji by Daddy Castle in the stamps. On June 15, 1965, the Hudson Space Door closed and the Wasanbi Inuits left the old post of Wasanbi. The Wasanbi Inuits dispersed throughout their traditional hunting territory and within towns like Matagami, Miquelon, and Chapay. Nako guys for you, discuss a pig nose and Wasanbi. Nako guys for you, and you and Wasanbi, the Matagami, Miquelon, Chapay, game out that's just down here to speak. In August 70, the Hudson Space Store closed, and the Nemskull units left the old Nemskull post and were dispersed in communities of Mistissini and Waskaganish. Near you got to park and Jiga. Near I say, near Hudson Space Company. How can Gandom Magona, the Badman you say, thank you. Gandom Magona in affairs, Gaidagona, how said you back near each cavatic near you, I just got them Chanoid. I didn't go in Yaska. I'm on you, I just got them Chanoid. How can you stone then be irrigation and on the way brought back Robert? How can you stay the Pignucci? Gina no, Nista Marge, I'm on you, I didn't go to the Pignucci. Smack us say this, if shame me good, clear not against me. Lagran and that Sibi stuck have me kind. Kunia, my Kafata, Kunia, that Indian affairs. Just that near here. Washaw had Shoyan. Yagaga day choice out in Jason. I watch ye, watch Nancy. Just hagnoid and ye. I'm scared you. Ojibwe did not have a community and lived in small encampments of shacks and tents within the direction, often near the town of Shibugmo. Dory Lake was one such encampment. Consequently, by 71, Eeyou Istchee, with a population of about 6,000 people, lived in 6 settlements, Great Whale, Fort George. Nimagay Sashanoshay, Negawachika, Miguishna. Sashanosha, Jacka, toxic, or Yamagat, toxic, General Japan, his recommendation against. We used to Latin, this journey. I'm going to have a call and go over Senate. I'll go on the how could I have it sing in Skumon? Thank you.
Miigwech, Robert. This was a very, very interesting segment. I might be chief when I'm finished that book. Okay, do we continue or?
1, 2.
Good afternoon. So we're going to continue this around the table gathering, meeting, whatever we can call it. So we've been stopped at Robert Kanadowit. Now we're going to go with defending and protecting our Cree rights, Creator, autonomy through the new relation with Quebec. The next guest will be Monsieur Dr. Ted Moses. Big hand, please.
No, suggestion that Luciano tayo who amamu big the sake mo ikot was speaking notes ayo dan if you look at Jana was go even be sick ayo the one with the good guy Eeyou Istchee and William. Good afternoon, wish everyone a good afternoon, and it's a pleasure for me to be here, to be amongst you people. It's always been a pleasure to be with the Washaw Sibi leadership and people, and I compliment you on the wonderful peace that you have since I was Grand Chief. I'm the next speaker on the round table on capacity building. I will not be too long. Do my I know that Robert Kanadowit this morning did a very good presentation of the evolution of the Crees in seeking recognition and asserting Cree rights. As Robert Kanadowit has rightfully said, this all began in 1492 when Christopher Columbus was lost and landed. Therefore began the process of colonization. I argue with a lot of university professors and people from the church saying that Christopher Columbus found the Americas and discovered, the Aboriginal peoples here. And I would argue and say, well, how can one discover something when there is already people living in it? And how can we be discovered by someone that is lost? So this is where it all began in 1492. There used to be a Roman Catholic priest in East Maine by the name of Philip Lancourt, who I helped learn Cree and write the book on how to speak Cree. I was a student at the time, and he tried to convince me that the term Quebec meant that it was the Indians from the North Shore that didn't know how to speak the language, and told Jacques Cartier or Champlain or whoever it is that Quebec, meaning. And I would say, no. The Aboriginal people or the Eeyou of the North Shore tried to speak the language of the people that were coming ashore. They were telling them, no, go back. When I was young, I come from solely relied on life. For me, the trap line was my world. There were no other kids, to play with. The Yaigahisko or the Yaigahigo, and just my sisters were growing up. No other people from the Cree community. So coming back to the Cree community in early June, paddling down the river with quite an experience for me, being in my own community with my own relatives and some people that I knew that I'd never seen all year. Some concerns for me at the time. For me, the trap line was my world, and I had every right that anyone could imagine, although at that time I had no notion of what rights were. And when I got older, my late teens, I was very impressed by the leadership of the Indians of Quebec Association. Robert Canado had mentioned this morning, and notably Max Gros-Louis and the late Jacques Baudouin with Josie Sam and Robert Canado, who traveled to the Cree communities and made it to East Maine. And they explained, rights. To me, it said, oh, rights. Is there lefts? You have rights. What are these? And Aboriginal rights and the non-recognition of Aboriginal rights. First, it was 1763, which was the Rupert's land. That was granted to Prince Rupert. And then, there was the British North America Act of 1867, which again delineated, certain territories. In 1912 was the Quebec Boundaries Extension Act. Basically, the rest of Quebec from East Main River north was the 1912 that completed what is now known as Quebec, which was the Quebec Boundaries Extension Act. In all of these three, periods, the lands that were transferred, the Crees were not consulted. Our governments felt that there's no need for us to consult. However, the government of Canada, I don't know whether I should, compliment it for them, ensured that in these transfers of land, that Quebec must settle the land and the rights of the Crees, or the Aboriginal people of Quebec, although there was no clear or explicit mention or recognition of rights at the time. So that was the first notion. That was my first exposure to the whole realm of rights in the USC, and I was very impressed by the information, by the knowledge that these people had. That I started to, on my own, look into and study what these rights meant. In 1973, as it was mentioned this morning, Justice made a decision to grant the Crees the interlocutory injunction, meaning a temporary injunction, putting a stop to the James Bay hydroelectric project. His decision was based on Cree rights, even though Cree rights were not defined at the time. However, he did say that the Crees had the right to use the land and the resources. These were known as usufructory rights, and of course there were some apparent rights, which had not been defined, that the Crees had. Before the Maloof decision in the fall, in order for the Crees, for us to go to court, we had to prove that we had a right to be heard, meaning that that we were not just permanent, that we were not just squatters, as we were recognized as the government of Quebec and Canada, and that we were permanent inhabitants, that we used the water bodies, water resources, and so on. So there were about 4 or 5 days of hearings just on that, just to demonstrate that we had a right to be heard in the Quebec, following which then, after a recess of a few days, the judge decided to grant us the right to be heard, which you saw this morning, which is one of the longest days of court arguments, certainly here in Quebec. And Quebec, at that time, North Canada, did not recognize the rights of the Cree. As far as they were concerned, we didn't have any rights. We were squatters, Eeyou Istchee, as Washaw put it, and there was no need to negotiate with the Cree regarding the hydroelectric project or the territory. But because of the strength of our rights, we were able to convince that we had a right to be heard. We were able to convince Maloof, based on our rights, that the project must be stopped. Although these written rights, you cannot find them in any book, here in Quebec, but it does mention the term rights. And rights are not something that governments can give. Rather, governments like to take away rights, and governments can only recognize the rights of individuals, the rights of collectivity over individuals, over services, or over land in general. And the assertion of these rights, claim of these rights, must be made by the people that are the inhabitants, or certainly that have a right to in the territory, and in whatever way they're being affected by a project. So with that began then when we won the decision in the Superior Court, even though the government appealed it 1 week after, we filed again in the Supreme Court of Canada. First, a temporary injunction, and then secondly, a permanent injunction. As Robert mentioned, Bourassa, the government of Quebec, offered an 11-point proposal that was rejected. And when the negotiations started, I was appointed one of the chief negotiator, along with Philip Washaw, who was negotiator. Leadership at the time was the late Dr. Billy Diamond, who was Grand Chief. Robert Kanadwat was Chief of Fort George, and he became the Executive Chief. I remember, later, I went to Chief Billy Diamond, and I asked Billy, I said, Billy, can you give an explanation, or can you give a little bit more precision to my mandate as a negotiator? And after some thought, he said, Ted, I cannot give you any precise things, because I'm sure negotiations will evolve. I don't want to hold you back. I don't want to bind you to something. Be flexible. I want you to be flexible and all of that. Because my advice to you is that masters of our own destiny. That was coined by the late Dr. Billy Diamond. And I said, okay, all right, is that good enough for you? I said, I guess so. I went back to where I was working, my workstation, and Philip and I shared an office at the time. So Philip and I, Philip, here's our mandate. Philip said, is that all? I said, yeah. It's a very broad mandate. The sky. You and I now will have to be very imaginative, very innovative. And now we have to define what Cree rights are, which will then be sanctioned upon the signing of the agreement. So that's how it all began. And in 1975, the James Fair Northern Quebec Agreement was signed. And in it, if one reads it, every chapter refers to Crees having a right to something, whatever it be land, hunting, fishing, trapping. You must understand during that period that hunting, fishing, trapping was a way of life, that our people were very that. The majority of the people depended on that for survival, and there were very few jobs, and we had to create some things to bring to the people. And so that's why we have some sections there that are notably stronger than before. But if you were to look at all of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, sure, it is a modern-day treaty. It is an agreement. It's complex. Negotiations were complicated and tiring. We lost lots of sleep. It had an impact on us and our families. But you can all look at it as of Cree rights, which were sanctioned and received constitutional protection when the 1982 Quebec Constitution Act was enacted, and the amendments, I believe, a year or 2 years after that. So it's a very important document for the Crees, so important that no government wants to enter into a negotiation on the basis of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement with any other Aboriginal group in Quebec. With one, of course, I think it's the Northern Floods Committee, but eventually, the people bought out and had to sign off on the agreements. This is where I compliment the leaders for their endurance and for their determination not to sign off on any of the rights. Signing off on rights would have meant we wouldn't be sitting here today. We wouldn't be talking about the opportunities. We'd be talking about rights. And life in the community would be much more different. It would be much different. After 1975, we had some extreme difficulties in implementing the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. Governments failed to set aside the adequate financial resources to implement many provisions, which resulted, first of all, in the loss of life of some of our people, children, elders, when we had the epidemic that killed some people in Muskogee and Deniska. And it's due to the study which was done, which concluded that this is a result of Canada's failure to fulfill their obligations for adequate water, sewage, and housing in the Cree communities. And it became that allowed now for the Crees to start building their communities so that we could have adequate services as it was envisaged in the foreseen in the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. Now, with that, implementing the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, for us when we were negotiating, we made sure that the agreement was not like the old treaties, where you get the same thing, not value. You get a chest, or the chief gets a suit. You line up for your $5, your treaty payments. So we designed the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement such that it was not written in stone, that it could evolve with time, it could evolve with maturity of the Crees, that if Quebec and the Crees, or Quebec and Canada, mutually agreed to change certain provisions of the agreement, for whatever reasons there may be, that allowed it to be done, without, infringing or taking away any of the rights that are mentioned, that are included in the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. The process of implementation, 1975 to 2002, was a long, difficult period in which we were denied our rights to many things. Not having adequate resources to run the Cree School Board, which had an impact on the students, not having a budget that recognized the needs of the Cree Health Board that affected our people and their health, limiting the resources for chief and councils to run their own communities, and of course, not the least, being denied the benefit of the extraction of natural resources from our own territory, Eeyou Istchee. So notwithstanding the constitutional protection the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement was receiving, we had difficulties in its implementation. The fights began will continue with the announcement of the Nodaway Broadback Rupert River hydroelectric development, and then it was the Great Whale development. All of these had to do with protecting Cree rights. The government felt that they could come in and do whatever they wanted to do, without due regard with Cree rights or Cree consent. The Crees together in unity decided to take on the fight. Took the fight to the media, to the public, to get support of the public. We took the fight to the New England states because the New England states were buying hydroelectric power from Hydro-Quebec. We took the fight to internationally to the United Nations to inform the world of what was happening and what the government of Quebec and Canada were not doing to respect Cree rights and what they were doing to basically deny us our rights and to benefit from the extraction of natural resources in Eeyou Istchee. Forestry became an issue. In 1975 it was not an issue. However, they discovered new methods of how to use smaller wood that was left behind after so many years of forestry development. And again there we had to deal with the developers and then end up with some 28 court cases just on forestry, just so that the Crees could have some benefit, so that they be respected regards the activity of forestry. And this continued. I don't know how many cases we had, maybe 32 with the government of Canada. If my numbers are not right, I didn't do research for the proper. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We've already resolved those and put them aside. And so that's the extent the Crees had to go in order to be where you are, be where we are. And just to demonstrate to you how serious the leadership of the Crees were about protecting Cree rights. So these benefits that we have, that we are benefiting from now, is not just governments are so generous that they want us now to control things, that they give us the resources to do that. These is the result of Crees standing up for their rights and ensuring that these rights are respected. We also had to go to the nations and participate in the drafting of a UN declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples. The Grand Council was very effective in that. It involved and with the experience of the Grand Council with regards to negotiation of agreements and ensuring that those rights are respected. There was a lot of respect in the UN community, which resulted in a few years ago
let you know before I move to the presentation. So do I have a stick or just go? So the evolution. So in the fur trade era, Cree society was organized in small hunting groups living in accordance with the traditional Cree way of life. So Robert and Ted. With the arrival of Europeans interested in fur trade, Crees found the animals which were a food source, also provided fur which could be traded for European goods. So negotiated during those fur trades, as they would go back and forth with different trading posts where the best bargain they can get. The Crees were known for that. The decline of the fur trade, so the Cree remained more or less the same from the beginning of the fur trade until the first third of the 19th century. During trading posts began to close. Reserve systems introduced by Canada, Indian Act introduced to manage and control affairs on reserves. So, Robert and Ted again. Crees continue to practice traditional way of life. The beginning of a dramatic change. So Quebec announces the plan for the largest hydro development project in the early 70s. Greece came together politically to protect the Cree way of life. Court challenges to hydroelectric development. Because it's been brought up. Negotiations ordered by the Cree. The agreement in principle negotiated in 1974. And the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement finalized. So the emergence of Cree self-government. Vision for Crees as partners in development of the territory. I think at one point in our time in history, Quebec campaigned very religiously against Crees, saying they're anti-development, which was never the case. Crees never were anti-development. They wanted to be partners. They wanted to be partners. They wanted to participate. That was it. So control of education, the health and social services, policing and justice, and these were all challenges. The protection of Cree way of life, especially the income security program, the environmental protection regime. And I think one of the things that I wanted to note in all of this is the governments didn't come to our territory or didn't come to our leaders to do an agreement. We had to fight all those agreements. I mean, 78 agreements have been signed, and I think every one of them had to be fought by somebody within the leadership. It was never given to us, especially with the implementation of all these agreements. That it's still a challenge. That the lack of cooperation or collaboration from governments or agencies is still a big reality. Both levels of governments attempted to minimize their obligations under the James Bay Agreement. So I would go to Sibi and the Crees laid out a clear position with respect to the potential Quebec cession. So I'm going to skip a bit of this because Ted has brought that up. The pay de brab. So I think these are things that were brought up. The new relationship agreement with Canada. I think the Cree Nation government assumes certain obligations of Canada under the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. Funding provided for a 20-year period. Provides a modernization of local governance. So this is where, for specifically for Washaw Sibi, how we're going to go, which direction it's going to go. So this is a very exciting time for the community. Declaration on natural resources, the Cree Nation mining policy, which we have. Adopted forestry regimes influenced on the Quebec legislation on forestry mining. Once I started taking the position, once I started taking this Deputy Grand Chief position again, the forestry, the way, how much influence we have and how much we will continue to influence the forestry regime within Quebec. So this is something that's really, I thought was very impressive, because I'm a coastal community, so our trees are not worth forestry yet, I guess. So it was never a big issue, but I think I've always tried to emphasize that now with the coastal communities, that it's not a forestry issue, it's a Cree rights issue. And this is something that we have to really unify ourselves on in terms of those issues. Recognition that JBCAN is not static, but a living tree, modernized and reflect on ongoing government obligations. I think that's going to be always a huge challenge for us, as Cree people, that they want to put us in a container and saying this is what a Cree is. That's not what it is, and we can never allow that to happen again, because we're moving and growing like any race. Laying the groundwork for the enhanced Cree governance, and this is a very exciting one. The governance agreement increased jurisdiction on Category 2 lands, which is something that, it was Category 1 Siniwa, now we've expanded to Category 2, and now we even have a say in Category 3. So these are things that are really imperative that that we participate in them, but these are very unique in terms of other First Nations. And that's it, jurisdictions. So Cree play a strong role in the new regional government. So small gains leading to revolutionary changes. I think this is something Cree leadership has echoed. Ted, Matthew Kuncom, Abel Bosley, they're always talking about let's take the best deal we can, then we'll deal with the other stuff as we go. Cree struggle over 40 years. Together, these became revolutionary changes. The key recommendation to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People. And one of the other most impressive things I was going to say is reading the UN Declaration of Rights on Indigenous People, how Crees have really played a major role on this issue. I was very impressed with them. These small gains, most of our communities were very poverty-stricken. From 1975 to 78 agreements now. These are agreements with governments, but also with developers, Hydro-Quebec and mining development. From being marginalized to becoming a major force in the economic and political life of the USC. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we're going to try to implement when we talk about education and capacity building is to start really setting the agenda for economic development and how it all relates to our health, how it relates to our political well-being, but also to our economic well-being. Today, and I think when we sort of touch base on it, Ted touch base on Robert, there is a sense of not a concern, but we don't know where we came from. A lot of the young people may not know truly where we came from, because I remember when they in Wiminchi, we got Cheyo I remember when they did the water, when they put the water and sewage together, and all four of my friends and I sat around the toilet bowl and flushed the toilet. Wow, just like in the movies, So that was very interesting. So this is the agreement on governance, the exciting thing. So the biggest challenge here, I'm just going to sort of summarize some of the stuff. The biggest challenge here was the MBJ, without consulting us, could make decisions. And it was a huge impact on trappers' cabins and certain parts of their harvesting. So I think these are things that we'll have to deal with. But the thing was, we didn't have this municipality without really consulting Crees. So this is before, and the middle is the aftermath. So Namji Dimsha is the scene. So the land regime, the local councils are the Nation government. The Aboriginal Aboriginal title. So this is really a very instrumental importance. So we basically, imagine you can manage the Cree Nation government, you debate Category 2 lands. What does this change? Okay, the Category 2 lands, the Cree Nation will look after lands and resources in terms of land use planning. At the local level, that we need to really focus on how we're going to manage our family territories, how we're going to manage the land itself in terms of people looking from outside EM. I think that's extremely important. Regional development and municipal management. For the next 5 years, the Cree Nation government will receive approximately 40 million to carry out this work, operations, capital, program funding. What about Category 3 lands? So, you get the mayors and BJ again. Now it's a regional James Bay Eeyou Istchee regional government again. So so there's mayors from Shipugmu, Shapei, Kevion, so Matagami, the other communities. So it's a very important regime. How will Category 3 lands be managed? Well, through the Eeyou Istchee James Bay regional government. The regional government will have the rights and powers. So, now, 22 seats that have been located equally between Cree and Jamesians, and non-voting seats for Quebec. So I think during negotiations, Abel mentioned that Shibugmo was pushing to have more seats because of their population. So I think in the future, this is going to be a very high topic, because in terms of population, they're going to push for a population. But in terms of Shibugmo or other communities, they might start pushing for more seats, more votes, so that way they can outnumber us at that. So this is something that we have to not be preoccupied with, but this is something that we have to strategically plan within our Cree to plan. So the first 10 years in Sundown, the representation and votes will be adjusted based on residence population. So this is where we're within the next 10 years that we have to really have lots of babies. No. But I mean, this is something that we have to figure out how we're going to do this internally. And the Cree French will be the main language spoken, the regional government. The languages of work will be either English or French. But this is a very important milestone. There's no other region that a non-Aboriginal community recognizes equally. And the thing is, this was fought for by Cree leadership too. Cree lands, the new regional government will have powers to plan land use, natural resources. And I just want to sort of point out, I don't know if it's in there, that we still maintain the James Bay Agreement, that the Cree harvesting rights in Category 3 lands are still intact. Everything is there intact. I think one of the other challenge is going to be is the government is going to try to delegate issues to the regional government, because Cree sit in there. But the James Bay Agreement is still nation to nation, or the Pays de Brave is still a nation to nation with Quebec and the Cree Nation. We haven't taken away treaty rights. I think this is something that's very important within this regional government. The biggest change we are now part of the decision-making process. The Crees will have more input as to its operation and mandate. So these are very important things. The other challenging for the southern communities is going to be the forestry management regime will be established. So there's already a little movement there. Jigga the testui changing the MNR and all those MNR near the make it as well. Just watching that see how they can do this. So Askoman watching that, like a sort of a divide and conquer tactic within the regional government. So I think it's very important that we are unified with the mayors of those communities. So achievements, police, justice, health, and education, big achievements. I mean, we look at our health clinics. Sure, if you look at our schools, they're very and nice. We have new justice buildings. You know, we have a regional police force. Progressively, small steps to jurisdiction and governance. I think it's just going to get better. The momentum seems to be on our side right now. So we're fully engaged in the governance of Eeyou Istchee. We have a real say in the management of land resources, which we never did. I mean, in this context, I mean, when I was talking about, Robert Kennedy was talking about 1973, 1972, you know, I think somebody mentioned it in one of these discussions, one of the General Assemblies or Council Board meetings, that there was no Aboriginal rights. I mean, this is something, I mean, this is in the 70s, yeah. I see nothing here. So it's up to us to assume the responsibility to protect the land while for our children and the future generations. The challenges is Quebec to implement the governance agreement and to establish the Cree Nation and the regional government. The Cree Nation government and the regional government will open up new and exciting job opportunities for Cree youth. Right now, just with the Stornoway and Eleanor project, there's 360 Cree working there. So, and I know they're trying to, I don't know if they visited the community here, Eleanor, because they are trying to get something going to visit, because we know a lot of the Washaw Sibi Cree are French-speaking, and we need more French-speaking Crees, so I think we should try to figure something out on that. The opportunities are great for those that are being unable to seize them, so let's ensure that we have the capacity to make the most of these opportunities. I mean, it's such a huge challenge, especially if you're Cree, you speak English and French, and I mean, obviously, I mean, it's such a huge challenge that you're basically, jobs will come to you. I don't know, am I done? I guess that was my closing speech, my closing remark. I thought there was going to be a slide there. So, I'm done. Thank you very much. The moderator has taken a coffee.
To exempt from the pain hydro.
Yeah, we tried it, we tabled it, and we tried to get free electricity for all the Cree beneficiaries. And it was not asked for free electricity like the churches, charitable organizations, and other institutions, all claiming that they should have a right to free electricity. So they said, if we give it to you guys, then it opens the door. We have to start thinking of giving it to other people in Quebec. So we were at we hit a stone wall. When that was not possible, later in 1986, Le Grand Agreement, we argued about the cost of electricity. What we got in 1975 was that the cost of electricity would be equitable to southern prices, like in Montreal. In 1986, we argued again, and what we got was the energy subsidy, okay, where each household would receive a certain amount of money to pay for the cost of electricity, because electricity was new for the Crees. At that time, we would turn the thermostat up and open the window. You know, so you're heating the outside and letting the cold come in. And the economic situation of the Cree communities was not as it is now. We were still very poor. And you know, our houses were not well insulated. So therefore, you know, the cost knowing how to use it, since it was a new thing. So that's, I hope that answers your question. We tried it in 1975. We couldn't get it. In 1986, we tried it again, but instead we got funding as a subsidy, not to pay for all of it, but as a subsidy to each individual household as an energy subsidy.
Question? Years. Man.
Okay, this is for Ted, and I'm asking this because hearing the presentations of Washaw Sibi, it makes me ask the question. So I'm actually asking for myself too. Knowing Washaw Sibi is in the midst of establishing itself as a community, Robert, I'd like to hear from both of you, Robert and Ted. How was it for you both when we lived off the land? And how was it for Tsasasibi to move from Fort George to Tsasasibi? So I'd like to hear both your experiences on that.
I think in the case of East Main, we're already a community. However, very, very isolated. The elders and the trappers, a lot of these ideas and a lot of these things were foreign to them. And a lot of them wouldn't believe that, you know, things could happen, that the road could be built from Matagami, some 620 kilometers long, or that airports could be built, or that, you know, bodies of water could be done, that their course could be changed. The large movement of material to hold back water. They didn't believe that we could have roads into our communities, that we would benefit from airports or from airships or housing. A lot of people didn't believe in the income security program, even though they agreed with it. A lot of them said, well, you know, we won't see that in our lifetime. I was one of the first people that we had refused to do the interview. The interview was necessary so that we could process the payment for hunters and trappers. When we went to deliver the checks, all of them came out, including the ones that refused to be interviewed, or were interviewed but refused to sign the form. And, you know, when they saw the other people getting their check, well, a lot of people got mad. And we explained to them, hey, listen, you know, if you don't do the interview, you don't get a check. You don't sign the form information to transfer it into a system, the beginning of computer age. The room in which the computer we were using was about the size of this room. And the hardware itself was about half of the size. It was on tape. The information for the income security program was about 1.5 meters long, the tape, for all the Cree communities. That's how high tech we became. But you know, I mean, I think the time when the agreement was signed to where we are now today, 39 years later, is, you know, is a long time. It's a long time for people to wait for all of the benefits that were promised to them, and you know, just to have, you know, where you're going to have a comfortable place, you know, to do your number one and number two, took such a long, long time. And, you know, a lot of the young people haven't gone out, you know, to go take a crap in the middle of a storm. And we didn't have toilet paper either. Right, Robert? But we were very organic. We used diaper rash or rash. Now, I think it's just we became to be organized. We were not recognized as organized communities. We were just villages. Chiefs and councils were not recognized until much later, and never mind the collectivity of the Cree people. And one of the good things about the Grand Council is that it brings people together and it defends Cree rights. And governments hated that. They wanted to deal with the chief himself and no one else there. So you have a situation where there is a community, and people are waiting and aspiring to the benefits of that. And it took such a long time for that to happen. And it's only, not too long ago, I guess, in the mid-'80s, that's when it was noticeable. And then after 2002, that's when we had all these opportunities. 2008 brought another wave of financial resources now to be able to develop our communities and create jobs and contracts and bring hope to our people where we can improve the quality of life. I think in the case of Washaw Sibi, it's a lot more complicated and difficult. You are living out there. People are living outside of the Eeyou Istchee Cree territory. You're living among all the respect to them in their community in Pikogan. So, the values, the history changes, and the opportunities don't exist like they do in Eeyou Istchee. Now, if Washaw Sibi had a community at the time of the signing of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, I think it would be like East Main now. A developed community which has a nice band office, swimming pool, heated swimming pool, a community center, nice facility, modern day healing center, nice facilities for education, school with computers. We have paved streets that we didn't have, which the government did not want us to have. A sense of collectivity, people coming together to work for something for the future of their children. I think that would be approximately the scenario had it been on the same footing with East Main, for example. But that's not the case.
I'll tell you the story about how the Native people got their housing. When we were part of the Indians of Quebec Association, we used to invite the minister every meeting we had. He used to come because he came from Quebec. Anyhow, we used to ask him about Native housing and so on. And he would be invited and said, "Why don't you visit one of the communities to see the living conditions that people live in?" And we suggested Great Whale because Great Whale had a nice running runway, airport. And he said, "You go in there and you can come out the same day." Whereas the other communities didn't have any runways. So he took us up on that offer, and he went up. And I told the chief, which was then John Vedagumskum at that time, told him, "John," I said, three categories of housing, living conditions to show him. He said, the poorest one, not so poor, and the best one you have. What they did when he arrived, they took him to the middle, not the poor one, but the middle one. And he just peeped in, and when they wanted to describe about the housing and so on, living conditions, he walked out. He said, "I don't want to see anymore." He said, "That's enough." He just didn't bother going to the others. He left and came back to Ottawa. And the next General Assembly we had with the Indians of Quebec, the chief, the president of the organization, who was Andrew DeLittle, said to me, he said, "Chief," he said, "you want to ask him the question about housing?" I said, "Yes." So when he came in, he would address the crowd, and then after that, people would be allowed to ask questions. And then when he finished, Andrew DeLittle asked me, he says, "Chief," he said, "you wanted to ask him a question, didn't you?" He said, "Yeah." So I said, "Mr. Minister," he says, "when are you going to give Native people housing?" He says, "The living condition that they are living now," he says, "it's awful." And just before I finished all my comment and so on, he said, "Chief," he said, You know, when I was invited to this meeting here, he says, before I left my office, I signed an agreement giving Native people housing in Canada. And you should see the uproar in the meeting was over. We left, everybody was shaking hands and everybody was greeting each other and so on. Now that we're going to have housing. So it was actually the Crees that convinced the minister to give Native people housing. This is how we got our housing. This was before the agreement even. Now we've got so much to tell you people. The young people today need to know what the history and the difficulties we had coming through to where we are today. Like I said before, we didn't have no guidelines. And this gentleman sitting right beside me here had a long hair, you know, hippie style. And now you see he's got a white hair now. You know, one time we were sitting in Chesapeake having a meeting, you know, talking about this whole agreement. One of the women got up and said, why didn't you involve the young people then? And I said, we said, how young did you want them? They were in their 20s. Early birds. And now, you know, like I said before, and like I always say, we didn't have no guidelines. It was only through the wisdom of listening to the elders and also our fathers and brothers and sisters and whatnot, how do they want their living to be addressed and so on. And then during the negotiations, you know, we were sort of, you know, when it got tense, people would crack a joke and we laugh on our side here. We laugh. And the others are all white-haired people on the other side. They would just, you know, wonder why we're laughing so much. And finally, they told us, they said, you're not really speaking for your own people. You're making a joke. You're just speaking for yourselves. And then this is where we talk to the people down there. And then they went to Chesapeake. John Siacha and Almar Couture, who was the chief engineer at that time, you know, for James B. Energy. They went up to Chesapeake. I asked, I had a meeting before that. I told the elders, I said, I don't want the elders, so many elders to speak. I said, I want to give the opportunity to the young people to speak to them and tell them the reasons why we're opposing the project. That we want to live our way of life the way our ancestors did, and we want to pass it on to our young people and so on. And this is what happened. And then finally, one of the young people, I don't even remember who it was, but I just started the meeting and I went back at the room and listened. And one of the young people told Alma and John, as you know, we cannot all go to Montreal and talk for ourselves. I said, there's over 1,000 of us here. I said, you wouldn't be able to take us all. That's why we have leaders to speak on our behalf. What do you think we're having leaders for? He says, they're doing the job that we asked them to do, to prepare their people. And this is actually what did the trick. And after they came back, they sort of joined in every time there was a joke on. You know, they started to laugh. And someday one of the guys said to us, he says, it kind of feels relieved, you know, sort of in the chance that they have listened. And you know, some of those items that we have, the land, especially the land concession, that was agreed upon 6 o'clock in the morning. When finally we got John tired out a little. You know, most of those things that are precious like income security and all those, were done late in the morning. Of course, we can't do it now. You know, we used to be young in those days, but you know, right now, if we tried, we wouldn't be able to do it. So those are the things that young people today should know how hard, and that it wasn't easy to come where we are, because people believed in themselves, be consistent to what they believe in, and to be able to pass it on to the younger generation, to younger people now that are leading us today. This young fellow here, I don't know how old he was when we were beginning. I think he was still in school. But now he's one of our leaders. You know, this is life. You know, you pass it on to others to carry on. We laid the foundation at the start. Now our young people, we depend on our young people and our leaders, present leaders today, to carry it on for the next generation.
One question here.
I have something here. I don't know, it's from the next table over here. This young. Who wrote the Cree Nescape Act? And who has the original Cree Nescape Act? I don't know which one of you is going to answer.
The Cree Nescape Act was not written by one individual from in the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. At that time, the term that we coined and was acceptable to governments was local government. Self-government followed that later. And remember those times, the Indian Act was in place. And after much review by myself and legal counsel and my fellow negotiators, we decided that the Indian Act wasn't going to be appropriate for us, that we wanted to better control right, controlling our communities, making decisions for chief and council, that we said, okay, let's, when you're young, you know, you have lots of good ideas. Let's scrap the Indian Act. Let's throw it out. It doesn't apply to the Crees. There are no reserves there anyway. We kept one provision, which was the definition of who an Indian is for the purposes of tax exemption. That's the only provision that we kept. In the chapter on self-government in the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, we outlined some of the principles, because it was not, we could not do everything, complete everything, but we wanted to make sure that self-government would happen, that there would be a new legislation enacted by the government of Canada. So we put all the principles down and so on, and then after the agreement had been signed, then there was negotiations with Canada and the Grand Council. What all of these principles mean in legislative form. We went to the Cree communities, all the Cree communities, to consult with chief and council, with the community members. So there was some renegotiation, changing of drafts. I think we had lawyers on our side. Probably about, by that time, maybe 4, 5, 6 other Crees working on it. We had also a student summer employment program just on the Cree Nescape Act to tell people about that. It was not written by one person, but you know, it was the effort, the collective effort of a number of people, and it took some time in order for the bill to be passed in, I believe it was 1984. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Fred Moat. Rodney, how you get him? A new scope by day. See, they'll go with Magnot. And no. Okay, TGB by at Washaw Sibi. Scope by day. Okay. I'm going to go back. See, so that on a more than a couple of years ago. Lasar, did the one on the way be at the Mushumanande, Nukun, my grandfather, my God, Abestada, it was the Abijay Pauling I went with you way more the Washaw CB, but I got the Muju Tier. The one is stubborn ones, what you here, I did again. Now, Daudut, Ebetada, as so many years, as when Gavage beat Tevayatot, 1967, Gavage beat Yat, Nalgandamuya. A couple years after, before 70s, maybe 68 or 69. Die way benaan de agamto de dat en min die daar wen en gaan weer elgen as een beetje way benaan elgi bij in de first page elgen ga dit semaal takkigen zei dat het zijn elgi type Batman in de first die naga goed min mooi waaihoed couple of kilometers here down the river. As you now on the way back. As mean we show we even go on by there again. Did that south that now, but that you be say and the whole street. Elk nasi so take man on this. Eeyou Istchee happened by this afternoon. Bij mij ten maar goed te maken aan de beste nacht. Kasko miskamat. Last summer, Jim Skinner, that's your way back. Now, Paul Whitman says, finally, some Skinner did I want to know how long we're going to wait, you good? And they did. As we get tired, my family get tired. My appetite has got nothing on. We stay in reserve. That's the matter for you. We meet in my and we was taking shop to avoid. Second means in the Gaska, I shall go west, but not 18 years. We Tamagoyan bag. Like Rodney guy did. Kapitan on the bait plan door, extra shaft over here. As mean, but that boy tall, Rodney. Stay in that boy tall. I'm going to take my fate. Every day is the man. I'm getting tired too. I shouldn't say you, I'm going to be 72 my next birthday. New Year up 10. Washaw, Sibi, Edge, and dead. Thank you.
Good now. Thank you. Okay, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, General Summers, you know, maybe we can bring. I'll ask Abel to maybe do a briefing. I don't know. Maybe that's something we can do. Give me the whole next week so we can discuss it more in detail to respond. I should got something as well. I think that's probably the best way. So I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, I know it takes time, and I mean, puts dudes makana money again. Sibi politics. So I think the thing is, it's always in the what I told makan. Last year, it's only been 1 year. Yeah, but it's Sibi. yagadamido hagino mia kubak beta so yaga mido is ya lo si mindu steza o ado beta so sta pshishu ina baugi ba noch we semana to again conservative government here they have a very different idea of where Aboriginal people should be in terms of Canada, oil and industry. You get to put them. So, what can good it's now? We can what stagon you buy and I catch this to this can. So, I got into Bajagan with that. In my 2015, we're hoping it becomes a liberal government rather than a conservative government.
Got the chief was talking about the youth trip we made. I was there. I was one day the elder. There was a Kukum with us, which was. He told us all kind of story there. By the river. Kawaptak. I said they want to chop them in the river. Chopped in the Moshome and they got dead. Come dead. And they guys were living. Chopped in and the Wichian. Chief guy did this morning, Washaw Sibi guy spade out a bit lake. I went one side a bit to be, there was another side